Hey, this is Mr. Jerk. Just going to walk you through this assignment, the portrait frame collage. I don't know what else to call it. It's got a bunch of photos in frames on top of a portrait. For this assignment, you want to use about 6 to 10 photos on top of a main portrait. Right? I'm going to encourage you to tell a story about a person, someone you know well, right? Think of somebody who matters to you in your life. Do a little brainstorming and think about things that you might research about them, maybe a little bit about their past and their present and where they'd like to go in the future. If you're picking somebody like a celebrity or someone you can't, actually photograph, right? That's fine. I just really don't like it when students do that because you don't really own the rights to those photos and it's not nearly as meaningful. Okay? The whole goal of this is to tell some kind of story with images. Try to pick images that represent this person. For this example here, this is a student example. She used photos of her graduating, photos of the university she wanted to go to, photos of her and her friends, right? So that's a really good way to represent different aspects of her. You need to collect all those images together. So today I've already made a folder of images. It's folders of photos of my family and stuff I like, right? I got about 10 to 15 images in there, and I have a photo of me, a plain portrait on a white background, right? These are some student examples, right? This is a really common practice project. You see this aesthetic all over the place. And of course, a lot of these are celebrities. So again, if you don't want to do yourself or a friend and you're doing a celebrity, just gather a bunch of photos off of the web. These are professional examples. You see this a lot in like graphics for social media. I've seen it a couple of times on like movie posters, sports graphics, advertisements. It's pretty common, right? So tons of examples right here. A couple of movie posters and sports graphics. It's a really, kind of a standard composition, just photos on top of a central portrait. So today, you're going to use a ton of different things. I borrowed this from another teacher, and I'm going to modify some of the steps here and walk you through them. This also combines everything you've learned up until this point, right? So you're going to be adding and layering your photos. You're going to be using layer masks. You're going to be using a couple of things you don't know how to do, like guide layouts and shapes if you want, and using selections with painting, which you haven't done a whole lot of. Okay. So we're going to hop on over to Photoshop. I already have my folder of images, right? The first image I'm going to open is my portrait, right? So here's my portrait on a white background. So I'm just going to drag and drop that into Photoshop. And what I want to do is I actually want a pure white background so that the focus is on the portrait and the collage. So to do that, I'm going to use my object selection tool in the upper left-hand corner right here. Right? And I'm just going to choose select subject at the top of the screen. We're going to wait a little bit for that to process. And this usually does a really good job of selecting our subject. That looks perfectly fine. So I'm not going to do any cleanup on it and select a mask. You can add a layer mask by clicking this little layer mask button in the floating toolbar, right? Or you can go to your layers panel here and click on this little layer mask icon right here. And now that I've cut out my portrait, right, I'm going to add a background to the portrait. So you can do that in your layer panel really easily, right? Click on this half white, half black circle right here. This is how you add fill or adjustment layers quickly. So click on this menu, go to solid color, right? And the last color I picked was blue. I want a white background, so I'm going to drag it over to white, click OK. And right now, my background fill layer is on top of my portrait. So I'm just going to click and drag these to reorganize them. Okay? So I got a portrait, I got a white background, right? Before I start adding a bunch of images to this, what I want to do is I want to kind of make a grid so that I can lay my photos out and they kind of line up, right? So to do that is really, really easy, okay? We are going to go to our View menu at the top of the screen here, right? We're going to hover down to Guides, and we're going to make a new guide layout. Now, how many guides you make is up to you, right? This is what I recommend, you know? I'm going to add a little bit more margin here. You can type in here, or you can use your scroll wheel to go up or down. But you want a couple of rows, a couple of columns, right? You can make as many or as little as you want, but I would recommend, you know, 10 by 10. You also want a little bit of gutter. And gutter is the space between. That's where you're going to paint your white borders around your photos. So make sure you add, you know, 20, 30 pixels of gutter, right? I'm actually going to add 40 pixels of gutter, right? And make them a bit thicker so they're easier to see. And this right here is exactly what we need, so I'm going to click on OK. And a couple of things about guides, right? You can change the appearance of guides if you click in this empty space here and you deselect your layers. In your Properties panel, I'm just going to collapse Canvas for now. This little section here will only pop up if you don't have a layer selected. Notice if I select a layer, it's not showing up, right? So if I click here, I'll deselect all my layers. And this is where I can do things like lock guides in place so that they don't move around. If I don't want to see my guides, right, I can click on this little icon to hide them, right? And that's also in the View menu. So if you don't want to see these, right, go to View, Show, and you can turn off your guides in that menu as well, right? And the reason you want the guides on is pretty straightforward, right? We're about to put some more images into this collage, and they kind of help us line up our photos. So let's do that real quick here. So here's all my photos, right? I got a ton of different photos. Let's just kind of drag and drop some photos into our open file. So I really like this picture of the woods here. So I'm going to drag and drop that, right? And I'm going to kind of put it over here on my shoulder, right? To zoom in, right, Control plus. To pan around, just hold down your space bar, click and drag. You know, I can resize it right now. And notice I'm trying to kind of line it up with my guidelines here, right? You should notice that when you're moving these, they kind of snap into place, right? You know, it doesn't need to fit perfectly, but it, you know, the guides are going to help you line up your photos. So get it kind of close and click Done on the toolbar, or click on your check mark at the top of the screen. And just keep going, right? I need to collage at least, you know, 6, 7 photos in here. The only thing I would recommend you don't cover are your eyes, right? So I'm just going to quick drag and drop a few more photos in here. Okay, so I put a couple of photos in here, right? If I change my mind about where they should go or how big they should be, right? You can always turn on transform by clicking on the photo, and in this little floating toolbar, right? To transform a photo, you just click this little icon here and you can transform a photo. You can also, when you're moving or transforming something, right, turn on transform controls at the top of the screen here. These handles don't show up unless you check this box. And if you see these handles, you can, you know, you can kind of re-transform it click done to confirm, or the check mark, or tap enter, right? Next thing we want to do is we don't really need to show the entire photo, right? Like this photo here on my shoulder, as an example, is sticking out past the edge of my shoulder, right? Most of the graphics that we looked at, most of the photos were kind of confined to the person, right? Sometimes those subjects, right, kind of stuck out past the edge, and you can do that as well, but let's just practice adding a layer mask and making the photos kind of match the person here. So to do that is really, really easy. We already cut out our portrait here. So I'm going to hit Control-0 to snap it into view. I'm going to click on the layer, right, that I want to add a layer mask to. In this case, it's the picture of the woods here. And in my layers panel, right, what I want to do is I want to hold down the Control key. So I'm going to hold down the Control key here. And this is my layer mask for my portrait. So I'm going to click on my portrait layer mask while holding down Control. And you'll notice that the marching ants are back, right? They're going around my portrait, which means I have a selection that matches my layer mask here. Basically, when you hold down Control and click on a layer, you're selecting all the pixels in that layer. This layer mask is just the pixels that surround my head, so that's what it's selecting. We've already selected our forest layer here, so I'm just going to click on the layer mask button to add a layer mask to that layer. Right? Pretty easy. I'm going to show you how to do that a couple more times here. So let's just kind of stretch that out. Right? Same thing for this layer. I'm just going to hold down Control, click on my portrait layer mask, and then on this layer, it's already selected. It's already active, right? So I'm just going to add a layer mask to that layer. And you can see she's hidden behind the ear. And we're just going to keep doing that for each layer here, right? Control click, add a layer mask, right? Control click, add a layer mask. Okay? So now, right, all my pictures are inside my portrait, right? You can leave it like this. The only problem is it's kind of boring. I kind of like it when some of the stuff sort of kind of comes past the edge, right? I highly recommend you modify your layer mask. Let's just take a look at this picture of my brother's wife, and there, my niece. Real quick here, this layer mask, right? If I want to be able to see, the rest of this photo here, I can change the density of this mask, right? So the way you do that is your properties panel. So I'm going to make sure in my layers panel here, for this layer, that I click on my layer mask, right? And the density slider is right up here in properties. So I'm just going to turn down my properties density here, my layer mask. You can see in the thumbnail that it's getting kind of light gray. And now we can actually see the photo. So if we want to modify this layer mask, right, we need to use our brush tool, right? We need to, make it kind of a round brush, semi-hard, a little bit smaller, and use white pixels, right? Because this right here is already masked. So we can paint, we can paint her legs back into the photo, we can paint her hand, and just have a little bit of fun playing with this edge here, right? If I want it to kind of fade out, I could use, softer edges or a little bit less opacity here, right? And kind of make that fade out a little bit. And to see the effect, we just turn up our density, right? And it looks like they're kind of breaking the edge of the frame there, okay? You don't need to put these in nice, clean little boxes. You can modify your layer mask however you want to, right? I could, if I wanted to, just simply, right, kind of get rid of this section here and kind of have it fade out if I wanted. Doesn't matter, right? We're having a little bit of fun. Just to show you that one more time, right? Here's a really good example of how I could modify this layer. It's a picture of a forest. There's a bunch of trees here. So I'm gonna, again, click on my layer mask, turn down the density, right? And I'm gonna use my brush here with white pixels to kind of fade in some of these trees. I'm not going to do a great job of painting these. It doesn't matter if it's perfect. I'm just going to kind of gently fade in some of this scenery. Right? And then I'm going to turn the density back to 100%, right? So, right, kind of fun, kind of breaking the frame there, a little bit more playful, right? Try that on a couple of your other photos. What I'm going to do now is show you how to add color to your picture here. There's a bunch of different ways to do this, right? An easy way to do it is the shape tool, right? Your shape tool is right down here at the bottom of your toolbox. I've already got a rectangular grid, so I'm going to click on this rectangle tool, but you can add other shapes if you want, right? I'm going to change the fill color here to, I don't know, let's open the color picker. Let's pick kind of a fun color. My favorite color is blue, so I'm going to pick blue. And then I'm just going to draw like, you know, kind of a shape here. Right, so here's a blue rectangle, right? Pretty simple way to add color, right? The only problem with it is this blue rectangle is a solid blue rectangle. We can't quite see what's below it. And if you remember the examples, right? Color, the way it was used, was sort of as a transparent coloration effect. So to make it transparent, right? Look at your layers panel. You can, number one, turn down the opacity of the layer. So I could take my opacity here, just kind of turn it down to like 50% if I want. I could also change the blending mode. Right now the blending mode is set to normal. I could change it to overlay or multiply, right? And I know that doesn't seem like a big difference, right? But as you hover over these blending modes, this is a really easy way to get some kind of cool color effects, right? Darker color looks kind of cool, so I'm going to leave it on darker color, right? So that's a really easy way if you want to add a little bit of color, right? Another way to do it is by painting, right? You have tools like your rectangular marquee tool right here, right? If you want to paint your own colors and kind of mix and match different colors in a section, this would be the technique you want to use. Just make sure before you start painting that you make a new blank layer. So I'm going to make a new blank layer right here. I'm just going to call this painted color so that we can find it easily. And I'm just going to go, you know, in the corner here where it's kind of boring, and click and drag to select a little rectangle. And you know, it doesn't need to be a perfect shape. So before I start painting, I could subtract some rectangle shapes from my selection here, right? I can make this whatever I want, right? I could, you know, make it some kind of weird, chunky, blocky shape here, right? Once I have my selection, right, just go to your brush tool, you know, and instead of painting nice, solid colors, I could kind of mix and match and make this sort of like texture or decorative, you know? So I'm just going to kind of mix and match a bunch of different colors here, right? Some greens, some blues. Like, who cares, right? Have some fun. All right, and same thing. When I'm done painting, I can deselect this. I can change the opacity. I can change the blending mode, right? And see how that looks. That's kind of cool, right? So that's an easy way to add some color and texture. Last but not least, you're going to want to add the borders, right? And the same two techniques for drawing the colored shapes can be used to draw the borders, right? If you want, you know, you can make a selection here on a blank layer, right? just draw your selection inside of the gutter here. And make sure your selection mode is set to addition. Right? And you don't have to draw all of the grid lines in one go. You can kind of just make a selection of a few grid lines here. Right? And then take your brush. And I recommend white grid lines. So now that I've got my selection, I'm just going to paint some white pixels in here. Let's turn up our opacity, right? Super, super simple, right? And then when I'm done, deselect. So that's one way you could do it. Pretty easy. Another way you could do it is just take your brush, make your brush super hard, or you can make a custom brush in the shape of a square. I'm going to make my brush really tiny here, right? About the width of my gutter, right? And to make straight lines when you paint with your brush, just hold down the shift key. So I'm going to find kind of a pocket right here. I'm going to press the shift key, and then I'm going to click and drag, right? And you'll notice that makes a perfectly straight grid line. Now, if you don't like what you paint, that's okay, It should be on a blank, empty layer, so you can take your eraser tool, right? And use the eraser tool to kind of get rid of your mistakes. Just make sure you hold down shift and you'll be able to draw like a pretty straight line, right? You can kind of see it's a little frustrating to do this perfectly. So again, it depends on how perfect you want it to look. Try different things. Your other option, of course, use the shape tool. You can make white rectangles in the gutters. This is really easy because if you want to make your particular shape bigger or smaller, you just click and drag on the shape, right? Just be wary, if you want to modify a shape, make sure you use your path selection tool. That's an easy way to kind of modify the shape without having to constantly confirm each transformation, right? And if you select it with this tool, you can go up here and change the fill color at any time, right? So that's that. Keep going until you have borders around all your photos, right? Modify your layer masks. Have fun adding color, messing around with the tools, right? Change your blending modes. When you have about 6 to 7 photos in your collage and some color and borders around each of your photos, just make sure, you take a minute, turn off your guides, right? Go to your move tool, click off. Turn off your guides, kind of take a look at it, see what you need to add, what you need to remove, and then when you're done, make sure when you hand it in that you hand it in as a JPEG copy. So go to File, Save a Copy, and save it as a PNG file or a JPEG file, right? You don't want your Photoshop document. This document is going to be pretty big by the time you're done. It's going to have quite a few layers and pieces of data in it. Okay, and that's that.